To make the wrap bracelet, you need 7 inches of 3 different types of beads. We chose these beads because we just like them together. You can really make this with any style bead you like in any combination, but you'll want 7 inches of 3 different types. We have about 30 of the dyed Imperial Jasper square beads. These are 5 millimeters, and it takes about 30 beads to make up 7 inches. That's how we came up with that number. You'll also need 7 inches of freshwater pearls. That's about 30 pearls, and these are also 5 millimeters. We have brown wood rondelles that are 3 millimeters, and it takes about 64 of these beads to come up with 7 inches. Then we have some accent beads. These are antique copper filigree beads that are round. They're 8 millimeters, and we have 13 of those. To string this wrap bracelet, we're using bead stringing wire. We chose 19 strand because it has a lot of movement to it. It has good give, and we want that because the bracelet's going to wrap around your wrist 3 times. Then we have a copper hook clasp with a loop. To attach that, we have 2 copper jump rings, 2 crimp beads, also copper, and 2 clamshell bead tips that are also copper. For tools, we have chain nose pliers and wire cutters. You'll also need a ruler, and if this is optional, these are bead bugs, or you could use masking tape. The first thing you want to do is cut a 30-inch piece of bead stringing wire, and then to keep the beads from sliding off while you're stringing your beads, we're using what's called a bead bug. This is basically a little spring that you can attach to the end of bead stringing wire or whatever you're beading on, and it'll keep the beads from sliding off. If you don't have a bead bug, you can just use a small piece of masking tape and just fold it over the end, one end of your bead stringing wire, and then you'll bead from the other end. So for this bracelet, we've got the 3 different sections of beads that we're going to string, and we're going to string them in 7-inch segments. But for each segment, we're going to start with one of these filigree copper beads, and that'll just be a way to sort of give the bracelet a rhythm and sort of differentiate the sections with a little beautiful copper bead. Then we want to bead on 7 inches of these pearls. These are freshwater pearls, and they have a tiny hole in them, so definitely test your pearls on your bead stringing wire before you get started so that you don't get too frustrated if the holes in the pearls are too little. What you can do is change the bead stringing wire or choose a different bead. I'm actually going to dump my pearls out so that they're a little easier to grab. And you really could use any beads you like for this kind of bracelet. The idea is that by changing what the beads are every 7 inches, when you wrap the bracelet around your wrist, it'll end up looking like an arm party or 3 separate bracelets when really it's just one long bracelet. And the nice thing about that is you only have to put on 1 clasp. And sometimes putting on the clasp is one of the most challenging things for beaders, so it just makes it a lot easier. I've got a couple inches of pearls on there now. What I want to do is add one of our filigree copper beads, because we're kind of just going to add in the filigree copper beads here and there, so they're sort of randomly interspersed throughout the bracelet. It'll help sort of bring the whole look together. So I'm not really going to measure that out each time. I'm just going to add a couple more pearls, and then I'll add another copper filigree bead. And I'm going to kind of shoot for having 3 of the filigree beads mixed in with each section of bead. I have just a couple pearls left here, so I'm going to slide my beads down to my bead bug here and measure. And it looks like I went over my 7-inch mark a little bit, so I'm going to take a couple of these off so that I have 7 inches. Now I'll slide on the copper filigree bead that's going to be the bead in between the pearls and our next section of beads. Now we're ready to add on our second section of beads, which is our beautiful Imperial Jasper. And to do that, we're just going to feed them on the same way we did the pearls. And we want to mix in some of these copper beads. So I'm going to set 3 of them over here so that I remember to add those in, mix them in with these Jasper beads. I'm adding on one of my accent filigree beads with its open lattice work, and it's not wanting to go perfectly through. I'm feeding the Jasper beads on randomly. Each one's a little bit different than the other, so it absolutely does not matter what the order is, and they'll end up looking beautiful. We love that they have a little bit of brown in them because it picks up the brown of the wood beads that we're going to add next, and also it picks up the brown of this antique copper of the filigree beads. Time to measure again because we want to be sure we have 7 inches of each section here. That's exactly 7 inches. I'm going to slide that down and put on a copper filigree bead, and that'll be our transition before we add on the next section of beads, which are our wood beads. We're ready to add our last section of beads. That's our wood beads. And for these, because they're so little, I like to dump them into my hand and sort of fish them out with the bead stringing wire. I just think that goes a little bit faster. So essentially, I'm just going to feed that bead stringing wire into the hole and then tip the wire up and slide the bead down. And that just sort of makes it go faster. You can kind of do a couple at a time even, like that, and then let them slide down. And I'll do a few and then add on an accent bead like we've been doing. I'll get a good section of them on first though. There we go. We've got a nice little section of our wood beads on there now. I'm going to take one of our accent beads and feed it on. And again, these accent beads are going to kind of glue the whole bracelet together and give it a kind of unified look. Then I can take the end of my bead stringing wire again and just start fishing these wood beads out of my hand. Let's see if we've got our 7 inches of wood beads on here. Looks like we do. Now we'll add our copper filigree. That's our section divider. And I'm going to slide on my bead bug to make sure that my beads don't slide off. Of course, you can use masking tape if you don't have a bead bug. And next we'll show you how to put on the clasp. To finish the ends of our wrap bracelet, we're going to remove our bead bug first. If you put a piece of masking tape on your end, you can just take that off. And then we're going to slide on a clamshell bead tip. And a clamshell bead tip has a tiny hole in the bottom, and then it's like a little clam. And what you want to do is feed the bead stringing wire up through the bottom of our clamshell bead tip so that the wire comes up and out the inside of that little clam. We're going to slide that down a little ways. You don't have to slide it all the way down to where the beads are. You can sort of work out at the end when you're attaching the first side of the clasp because you're going to slide all the beads down after you attach the first end of your clasp. I'll show you what I mean. Now we've got our crimp bead. I'm going to slide that on next. And then I'm going to crimp the crimp bead using my chain nose pliers, and I'm just going to press it flat like that. And then we're going to slide the clamshell bead tip up and over that crimp and then use the chain nose pliers to close the clam. And you do it kind of gently so that you don't completely mash the sides because it is hollow. And then I'm going to use my wire cutters to just trim that wire. And you can trim it before you close the clam too if you'd like. The crimp bead in there just keeps all the beads from sliding off. And this clamshell bead tip does 2 things. It covers up that crimp bead so it kind of looks like a little bead. It makes it look more finished. And also it has this loop attached to it. And we're going to use that loop as part of our clasp. It will help us attach the clasp. So we love these little clamshell bead tips. Now we want to take one of our jump rings and feed it through that little loop that's on our clamshell bead tip. And then we're going to attach one side of our clasp to the jump ring. Just slide the loop on to the jump ring like that. Then I'm going to use my chain nose pliers to press that jump ring closed. And you can use 2 pliers for this if you're used to opening and closing jump rings using 2 pliers. Absolutely do that. We recommend that too, but in this case the jump rings were opened and perfectly aligned, so it closes beautifully like that. And now we have one side of our clasp attached, and we can slide our beads down and attach the other side of the clasp using the same technique. We'll remove our bead bug and then start by sliding the bead stringing wire up through the bottom of our clamshell bead tip, and this time we have to kind of pull it all the way down to where our beads are, and then slide on our teeny tiny crimp bead. Crimp beads are just a tiny piece of metal, like a little tube or a tiny bead, that when you flatten it, it holds itself in place. It stays put. And so it's used a lot in finishing the ends of jewelry and earrings, all kinds of things. It's a great little finding. Now we've got our clamshell bead tip with our crimp bead tucked way in the clamshell bead tip. And this is a little bit tricky. You don't want a lot of slack between your beads on the wire. So you want to pull the clamshell bead tip all the way down. But it means that reaching in to flatten that little crimp bead is a little bit tricky. So I'm going to use the tips this time of my chain nose pliers, and I'm going to reach in and flatten that crimp bead. This time I'm going to trim my wire first. That way it'll get tucked in my clamshell bead tip a little bit better. Now I can use my chain nose pliers again to close my clam over that crimped bead. And do that gently there. And now I'll grab my jump ring and slide it through the loop that's on the clamshell bead tip. Feed on the loop that's on the other side of my clasp, and then use my chain nose pliers to close the jump ring like that. That side of the clasp is done, and there is our beautiful wrap bracelet. And see how it looks like 3 different bracelets? It looks great.